In 2008, I was driving from New Orleans, Louisiana, to Eugene, Oregon. It was just me. I'm 22 and female, and my year-old pit bull in a 14-foot U-Haul truck with everything I own crammed in the back. A fancy flip phone, and my printout of MapQuest directions. I think the first smartphones actually came out around that time, but I didn't have one. Cell phone service was also much spottier, and there were long stretches through the desert where I had zero service for hundreds of miles. I was driving a lonely stretch of highway through central Texas when I realized I hadn't seen a town or exit for a very long time, and my giant U-Haul was really low on gas. Just when I'm starting to freak out and seriously run out of gas, I see a small town coming up. I pull into this town, and it is tiny. I was so worried about other things that I never did pay attention to the name of the town. But there were only about 6 streets in the whole place. I go gas up and am ready to get back on the road. Except, I cannot for the life of me find my way back to the highway. I circle the town about 4 times and start getting so frustrated because this is such a tiny town. How the fuck can I not find my way out? I can literally see the highway, but can't get to it. I return to the gas station to ask for directions. Now when I got gas, I paid at the pump and never went in. When I enter for directions, there's a skinny, nondescript guy who has black hair hanging down in the front of his eyes that looks like it could use a good wash. He's not particularly creepy, but a little rude. He never really met my eyes. He's looking down at a magazine. He gave me directions that don't sound right at all. He's telling me to take a road that will get me to the highway in about 17 minutes. For a moment, I am dumbfounded. Then I point out that I didn't drive that far from the highway into the town. Why so far to get back to the highway? I can literally see it from the town. He's so casual, almost like I'm just an annoyance and can follow his directions or not. Why should he care? He gives me some explanation about the road curving around that doesn't really make sense. He still doesn't look at me. Just whatever. I gave you your directions and waved his hand in the direction of the door. When I got into the parking lot, my whole body started trembling violently, and my heart started racing, seemingly for no reason. I get into the truck, and as soon as I put the key into the ignition, I burst into tears. I had the most terrible feeling that, no matter how nonchalant he acted, this man had bad intentions. I didn't know what, but I knew right then and there that there was no way I was going to follow his directions. Yet, this was the only store in this little town, and short of knocking on doors, no thank you, there was nowhere else to ask for directions. I decided I didn't give a shit if this town seemed like something dropped out of the Twilight Zone. I was going to drive around until I found my own way out, even if it took all damn night. Then, a big red beater of a pickup truck, as much rust as metal, pulls up and disgorged the quintessential Texas man. Huge, husky, and in flannel and work boots. Without even thinking about it, I jumped out of the truck and approached him quickly, yet warily. Looking in his eyes, I saw a kind human being. Or at least, I was hoping I did. I asked him if he could please give me directions to the highway. I told him I knew it was silly, but I just couldn't seem to find my way back. He looked concerned as I was visibly upset. So he made me laugh and very cheerfully gave me directions for a hairpin curve turn-off right at the end of a small concrete tunnel I had passed several times. He said it often confused travelers because it was so hard to see. They need to put up a sign, etc. With a sinking feeling in my stomach, I asked him how far in miles was it back to the highway. He laughed and gave me a funny look. "Miles, miss? I'd say it's a quarter mile at most. You can see the highway right from here." At this point, I couldn't help it. I had to know. "What happens if I drive?" And I gave him the directions the man in the store had given me. Texas looked at me very intently and asked me how I knew about that route. It was pretty far out, and usually only locals knew about it, so I told him. He was quiet for a few minutes, and then asked what the attendant looked like, and if I had a map of the state. Nope, just my MapQuest, which wasn't helpful in this situation. He goes to his truck and grabs a raggedy local map from his glove box, spreading it out for me. He traces the route I describe. The way the man from the gas station had told me to go led away from town, away from the interstate, and led to seemingly the middle of nowhere. Texas told me that the road did go about 17 miles. Right before, it dead-ended in the desert. I asked him what was out there, and he told me that it was nothing but some junk cars and a few trailers and mobile homes, all owned by the same family. This family was known locally as troublemakers, meth heads, and alcoholics. And these were the nice things townspeople had to say about them. And the erstwhile clerk was part of this family and lived down that road. I'll never forget the look in Texas' eyes as he told me this. He also told me that I was a smart person to listen to my instincts, and he told me to be careful traveling out there. I didn't know if the man from the gas station wanted what was in the back of my U-Haul or what was in the driver's seat, but thankfully, I didn't have to find out. Oh, and I learned that sometimes angels look like ruddy-haired Texans with scruffy faces and rusty pickups. Thank you, random Texas stranger. You really saved my ass, and I will always remember you with tons of love. Sorry I didn't ask your name. You are forever Texas to me now. This was about 4 or 5-ish years ago. Back then, I lived with my mother in a shed on a farm, surrounded by woodland. Our farmland was part of a larger piece of farmland that was split up and sold off, so we did have neighbors, though they were roughly half a kilometer away each. We loved that because of the privacy. It wasn't like there was nobody nearby I couldn't go to if I needed help. That thought is what had me fearlessly walking alone at night between the hours of 7 to 8 p.m., sometimes fluctuating from earlier to later, depending on the day. Sometimes, I even went out on a walk at 2 a.m. in the morning because I was restless and couldn't sleep. Looking back, this was incredibly stupid, and after this incident, I never walked after 6 p.m. ever again, always making sure there was at least some sunlight left when I set out. The route I always took was a road circuit. The first part was out in the open in front of all the other farms, including my own. If anything had happened, at least one person would have noticed, and reception was pretty good, so I would have also been able to call someone. The second half, on the other hand, was concealed by about 200 meters of woods between the farms and the back road, stretching the full 2 kilometers at the back of the farm. And it was during that part of the walk when I had this creepy encounter. It was late at night. I can't remember what time exactly, but it was pitch black with the exception of my torch light. I was about to approach the turn in the loop that would bring me out into the open again when I heard it. Help. It was this monotone voice that repeatedly asked for help. It didn't seem panicked in the least. I took my headphones out and turned my music off to make sure I was hearing correctly, but it didn't stop. Help. help. A very stupid part of me almost responded. Because for some reason, my first instinct was, oh no, someone's in trouble. Like a naive kid. Even though I would have been like 16 or 17 at the time. Of course, then my brain kicked in, and I realized that approaching that voice was just about the stupidest thing I could do. So, I started quietly backing away. Unfortunately, my cat had followed me on the walk and wasn't backing away with me. No. She was walking towards the voice, softly hissing. I remember desperately trying to get her to come back towards me without alerting the voice to my presence, just in case they hadn't noticed me yet. But I was getting scared and didn't want to stay there a moment more, so I ran forwards and grabbed her. Then, turned around and bolted back towards my house. I don't know if it was stupid of me to turn my back to the voice, as I was making so much noise while running that there was no way they didn't know I was there. And I had no way of knowing if they were giving chase. I was so fucking terrified the whole time. The image of someone cloaked in the shadows chasing me entered my mind, and even though I couldn't hear anyone behind me, I never once slowed down until I was back safe and sound within my house. It doesn't end there though. Despite how terrifying it was, there was still a part of me that was concerned about whoever it was. Because, what if they really had needed help? So I asked my mother to drive us to the location. Another very stupid decision, considering what we found. That being nothing. We called out and called out, but nobody answered. We didn't get out of the car though. Luckily, neither of us were that stupid. We drove home, having seen nothing and no one. But it still bothered me in the morning, so I had my mother drive us over again, and we searched the immediate area. Nothing. No indication that anyone had been there. There was no body, which, admittedly, was a drastic thing to search for. But I know shock can leave you eerily calm, which could have explained the monotone voice. And the lack of response afterwards made me fear that we'd been too late and we'd find a body in the morning. I don't know if I would have preferred this outcome, because at least then, I would have had a face to the voice. But no, we found absolutely nothing, and to this day, I have no idea who that voice belonged to, and why they were monotonously calling out for help. My mind has naturally come to some chilling conclusions and theories that leave me unable to sleep. Kidnapper, serial killer, all the classic horror stories. But I guess I'll never really know for sure. Before COVID-19 hit the United States, I was going to college in a city a few hours away from my hometown. I was living in an apartment in said city with a good friend from high school. There was a weekend where she went home to visit her family, and I had to stay back due to the fact that I had to work that weekend. It was Friday, and I had the day off, so after school, I decided to relax and watch some true crime. I'm in the kitchen making dinner around 6:30 to 7 p.m., and I hear a loud knock on my door. I freeze, which I wouldn't normally do. I had a really odd feeling and somehow knew not to answer. I try to stay quiet and I wait and try to listen to what's happening outside from my kitchen. I hear another really loud knock, followed by someone saying, "Apartment check." This is when I knew something was off. It was almost 7 p.m., and the apartment's office, maintenance, and anything else involving the apartment complex is closed by 4 p.m. I simply stayed quiet until I knew they were gone. I heard them do this to 2 other apartments down the hall from me, once again stating, Apartment check. I go on with my night and don't think about it too much after. However, I'm definitely more alert, especially due to the fact that I'm there alone. Later that evening, I go to the 7-Eleven across the street from my apartment. I drove back because the area I lived in was extremely questionable, to put it nicely, especially for a female at night. As I'm driving back to my apartment, I see 4 or 5 cop cars right outside my building. A man is cuffed and they're putting him in the back seat. I don't know if this was related, but I have a strong feeling it was. I'm still not sure what exactly the purpose of the apartment check scam was. I thought maybe it was someone with intentions of robbing the place and wanted to pose as a worker at the apartment to scope out the place. I'll never know for sure what their intentions were, but I'm so happy I didn't answer the door. I'll try not to make this too long, but I wanted to put this out there. For kids and parents. Not even your employer can be trusted. So it was the summer of 2004. I was 15 at the time, and working weekends at a skate park. Running the registers and keeping up shop. I was the only female employee there. The reason I got the job, I thought at the time, was because I used to hang out there a lot prior to being offered a position. They used to host events and hardcore/rock shows a ton. Those were extremely fun and the place where all my friends gathered for a good time. So we got to know the owners pretty well. Now, the 2 guys that owned the shop were in their 40s, overweight, balding. Typical older white guys. But they were extremely nice. Let's call them Doug and Mark. Doug was always more serious about the business, always trying to come up with ideas to better it, and rarely joking around. He was also married with kids. Mark, on the other hand, seemed like Doug's minion. He was usually out running errands, making calls, or cleaning the shop. He was a single guy. He was very outgoing and silly, so we always had fun with him around, until one day, when the fun stopped. Before I tell you the scariest moment of my life, I'll inform you of the events, or I'd like to call them red flags leading up to it. On one occasion, we were hosting a show where a local metal band was playing. There were lots of people there. Kids and adults alike were skating and running up and down the ramps and bowls, just generally having a good time. Then Mark suddenly came up behind me as I was talking with my friend Katie. He picked me up and swung me over his shoulder and started tickling and spinning me around, right in the middle of the crowd. I laughed it off and was yelling for him to stop, in a giggly voice, but I was honestly a bit creeped out, as he had never touched me before, even in a friendly way. Even at 15, I found this inappropriate for a man in his 40s to be so touchy on me. After about a minute, he put me down and was laughing and apologizing. I didn't think much of it anymore, and thought maybe I was overreacting. A week or 2 went by, and I noticed Mark was giving me flirty looks and sticking his tongue out at me when he was around. Again, didn't think much of it, as he was a super nice guy. I thought he was just being funny. One day, Mark called me into the back. We had 2 doors right behind the register that led to our stockroom, as Doug sat at the register on a business call. When we got to the back room, he picks me up, sets me on the washing machine, and tells me he wants to kiss me. I automatically shut him down. He then tries to persuade me to lift up my shirt for him. At this point, I'm really freaked out. I'm just hoping Doug comes through those doors any second. Again, I firmly tell him no, as I hop down and proceed to walk to the shop front again. That's when Doug opens the door and asks, "Hey, what are you guys doing? Did Mark show you our butterfly collection?" I just respond with, "Oh, nah," and I walk out. The two follow me. The rest of the day was pretty uneventful, and I just wanted it to end. I usually got off work around 6 or 7, but around 5, Doug asks me to go with Mark to run some errands. He jokingly said, "Take my credit card, but don't give it to Mark, haha." All I could think about was how awkward the ride was going to be, as we hadn't talked since the incident earlier that day. I was really dreading this trip, but I had no idea what was about to unfold. We get in his car and drive to my high school, which is on the other side of town, in a medium-sized, busy city, but about 5 minutes away from my house. And as we pull in the back parking lot on a Saturday, I ask him, "What are we doing here?" He responds by saying, "I'm scouting out a new area for a skate park. It's behind the school here." This is when I start to get nervous, but hoping it's true because I didn't know they were trying to expand locations at this time. He gets out of the car and motions for me to get out and come along. I hesitantly do so, and we start walking to the back of the school, and he's just talking about his visions of a new park. Nothing too serious. That's when we approach the woods. Not a wooded area, straight up dense, forest-like woods. Ones you can barely walk through. That's when he says, "Take my hand, come on, I'll show you the spot." This is when the alarms go off in my head, and I realize I could be in real danger if I go with this creep. In my head, I'm contemplating running or just going along with him, because I didn't know which one would make my situation worse at the time. I now know I should have ran. This pondering seemed like it went on forever, when in reality, it probably was only a few seconds. Thank God I paused a second before making any decisions, because that's when my cell phone rang. I honestly forgot I had it on me. It was my mom asking me if she could pick me up early so we could go to dinner. That's when I tell her with a sense of urgency, "Yes, I'm at the high school. Come get me, now." I think she could hear the fear in my voice, and left immediately because she was there in less than 5 minutes. During those 5 minutes, I tell Mark I have to go and wait on my mom. He seemed agitated, but agreed, and walked me to the front steps of the school to wait. He didn't say bye or anything. He just suddenly walked briskly to his car. My mom shows up a couple minutes later. I hop in quicker than I've ever done anything in my life. I know I must have been shaking. I tell her I'm not in the mood to eat and just drop me off at home. She asks me if I'm okay, and I say yes, and that me and a coworker were just there scouting for a new spot. I get dropped off at home and I'm just in shock and full of fear. I quit working there that day. I just never went back. I didn't explain anything to anyone, and I've only told my boyfriend and a couple friends about this. I'm 100% convinced, looking back on all of the red flags, and the fact that Doug didn't seem to trust Mark. Doug was actually a good guy. That if I had went into those woods, I wouldn't be here today. Who knows what he would have done to me. It's very weird when you survive something like that. It's never really seemed real to me, but it very much was. I have a 12-year-old daughter now, and I try to teach her about safety and predators all the time. That kind of thing can change you, and change the parent you become. An update to this was about 2 years later. Mark called my house phone I don't know how he got my number, and told me he was in Istanbul, Turkey, and about to open a skate shop there. I just said, "Please don't call me anymore," and hung up. Luckily, my nightmare was over after that, but hearing from him was like talking to the devil. I hope that man is dead or in jail so he can't hurt anyone else. I've always wondered if Doug ever found out about Mark, and if maybe Mark had to flee the country for a crime he committed, landing him in Istanbul. This turned out longer than I intended, but point is, as a woman or girl, especially, never trust anyone who's been a creep to you. I don't trust much of anyone anymore. I used to work mid-shifts for a couple of years. I would get off work at around 2 a.m., be at the parking lot in the building basement by around 2:30 or 3 a.m. One time, when I got off the elevator, there was this guy wearing the maintenance uniform sweeping the floor. He was not the usual guy that I see when I get off my shift. I was friends with the guards, receptionists, and maintenance people at my building, you see. I always bring them coffee from our pantry, and sometimes the occasional packed bread from our vending machine. I wasn't sure who this new guy was, and for some reason I was creeped out by him. Maybe because I could not see his face. His shoulder-length black hair was covering it. So instead of giving him the coffee I was holding, I decided to walk straight to my car. I could hear my heels clicking on the floor, but then I also heard a second set of footfall. I walked faster and noticed that whoever was following me walked faster too. I started to run. My car has keyless entry, so I just pushed the button and literally jumped in, pulled the door close, and clicked the remote button to lock the car. It was the new maintenance guy. He was smiling and trying to open my car door, pressing his face against my window. He wasn't saying anything, only smiling while trying to open my car. Now, my car is set to go on alarm if the door was locked using the remote and was started from the inside. So, I proceeded to start the engine, and the alarm went off. The guy stopped trying to open my door, stood straight, gave me a salute, and walked away. After what feel like hours, the building guard and the maintenance guy that was usually assigned to my parking floor approached my car. They were surprised to find me inside. The coffee had spilled all over me while I was sobbing. I told them what happened. Neither one of them knew who the guy I was describing was. After that incident, there were more guards assigned to the parking areas, doing rounds hourly. I never saw that guy anymore, and I hope to never see him again. This also made me more careful whenever I go out to any parking area. I always have a can of pepper spray handy, and I added a whistle on my ID lanyard, and bag straps for added precaution. Several years ago, when I was 25, I lived with, at the time, one of my best friends. Our friendship eventually started to dwindle, as it usually goes when you move in with a good friend, so she was rarely home. This night, however, she ended up staying at our place, heading to bed early. I was a server at the time, so I stayed up pretty late usually, watching YouTube and smoking pot. This night was no different than any other, except for the fact my neighbors tried to kidnap me. I'll go ahead and give you some background info on my house and my neighbors. We lived in a 3-bedroom house with 2 bedrooms, and the kitchen facing the crazy neighbors. They were a younger couple, living in a smaller mill house. They were constantly coming to our door, asking for handouts. Now, normally, I'd be happy to help a neighbor out, but they would come over and ask for crazy shit like for us to fill up an old Mountain Dew bottle with water because theirs got shut off, beer, and once literally to ask for $1. They would be consistently knocking at our door to ask for help, and when we wouldn't answer, I'd peek through the window to see them either jacking cigarette butts from the ashtray or pressing their eyeballs against the door peephole to see if they could spot us. Anyway, there I was smoking some weed and watching YouTube on my couch when I heard a knock at the door. I rolled my eyes because I knew exactly who came a-knocking. It's 11 p.m. I checked the peephole, and sure enough, the boyfriend was on my porch. Normally, I just walk away and continue with my life, but he looked like he was in distress. I opened the door up to see what was up. Hey, I just wanted to come over here and see if you would film my engagement. I got my girlfriend a ring here in my pocket, and I need you to follow me to my backyard and film it for me. Baffled, but curious, I told him congrats and said that I'd be out in a second. I just needed to put some shoes on. I shut the door behind me and locked it. Quickly, I ran to the back room and looked out into the backyard. I peeked through the blinds to see the setup. Nothing. Pitch black darkness. No sign of decorations or anything like that. Naturally, I woke my roommate up and told her what was going on. Yeah, fuck that, she said to me, and we both walked back up to the door after the boyfriend started banging on the door. I looked through the peephole again. I couldn't see anything and was confused, all the way up until he pulled his eyeball away from the peephole. I quickly turned around and put my back up against the door. My roommate came running back to the door from her room, manning 2 wire hangers for protection. We both clung onto those hangers and sat up against the door until he finally left. We were so freaked out, but we wanted to make sure we weren't overreacting. We went out our back door and hopped into a car so we could do a drive-by. They always had their front door open and also didn't have any blinds, so it was easy to see in their house. Slowly, we crept by in our car and peered into their living room. Sitting on the couch and all staring at the wall, they looked strung out, was the couple and an older man. We sped off and ended up staying at our friend's house that night. I never answered the door for either of them again. One day, I came home from work, and an older lady was parked in their driveway. She walked up to me as I got out of my car and asked if I knew where the neighbors were. I told her I hadn't seen them for a while, and she informed me she was the owner. She told me they were months late on rent and finally came to evict them. She entered the home to find it completely trashed, needles and garbage everywhere, holes in the wall, and literal shit on the floor. I told her I was sorry to hear that she had to deal with all of that, but I was happy they were finally gone. I'm not 100% sure what was going on that night, but I'm glad I didn't follow him back to the yard. Full disclosure, this happened 10 years ago, but I still can't believe how lucky I was to get away. I was 16, female, and running late for school, as usual. Walking down the road, I noticed a dark green car with tinted windows slowly following behind me. This was a residential community, and it was not usual for people to drive slowly. It was around 9 a.m. on a weekday, so I naively figured there was no danger as I hurried towards the bus stop. Arriving at the stop, and it started to rain, so I decided to stand in the small glass bus shelter to wait for the bus. The creepy green car stopped in front of the bus stop. The driver got out and approached me in the bus shelter. Now, this bus shelter was so small, there was only room for 2 people. He stood in the entrance and grabbed each side of the shelter, trapping me inside. He was very large and extremely physically intimidating. Something about his dead eyes sent chills through my entire body. He asked if I was familiar with the area. I responded yes, I was. He asked if I was going to school. I responded yes, I was. He then asked if he could drive me to school so I could show him the way. Call it intuition, but something in my head was screaming not to get in that car with him. I politely declined his offer and asked if he needed help with directions or something. Suddenly, he lunged at me, grabbing my arm. He pulled me out of the bus shelter towards his car. I started screaming and he kept insisting it would be faster to drive. By the grace of God, the bus pulled up at this exact moment. All my instincts told me to fight. I clawed at his face, I kicked him, I bit him. I contorted my body until he loosened his grip on my arm. Once free, I leapt on the bus as though my life depended on it. The bus driver asked if I was okay, but I couldn't reply. I ran to the back to find a seat and cried quietly in the corner as the bus carried me to school. All day, I sat in class and said nothing about what had happened to me. When I got home from school, I told my parents what had happened. They were horrified, especially after I showed them the bruise from the man's hand on my arm. We called the police. The officer arrived late that evening and took my statement. He said there had been several similar incidents in the area. He asked if I could come to the station and look at some pictures to identify the culprit. The following week, my mom and I head into the police station. The officer sets us up with a computer, and we start to scroll through the mugshots. There were so many. Not only was it discouraging to realize how many known sex offenders there are close by, but after a while, all the faces blurred together. Losing hope of identifying the guy, we were about to give up when I recognized his dead eyes in one of the pictures. The officers asked if I was sure. I confirmed it was him, but that he had grown a beard since the photo was taken. They thanked me and said they would call if needed. 2 weeks later, the news announced the police had apprehended the man suspected of kidnapping and assaulting young girls in the area. The news story included his mugshot, and it was the same man I had identified. He was caught with one of his underage victims in his car. It took years for the gravity of this incident to truly hit me. Had the bus arrived later, had I not been able to twist myself out of his grip, had he grabbed me while I was walking home and didn't see him, so many ways this could have turned out differently. I was so fortunate when others were not. I was driving home from a morning shift and was about 1 kilometer from home when this guy stepped onto the road in front of me, waving his arms and shouting, "Stop, stop, please stop." I slammed on the brakes to avoid hitting him, and he ran to my window. I've had similar things happen before when people need help after a car accident, and I assumed that's what this was. I wound down the window and this guy said, "Please, please help me. I'm being attacked. Please get me out of here." And I, being the credulous soft touch that I am, said, "Sure mate, get in." Now, I spend a lot of time in my car, and my front passenger seat is basically my office. And I covered it in crap, so, not thinking, I told him to get in the back. This was lucky. So this stranger is now in my back seat, and I said, "Can I take you to a police station? What can I do?" And he said, "Yes, a police station please." So I pulled a U-turn and head to our nearest cop shop. Luckily, it's only about 6 kilometers away. At this point, I still think this guy has been legitimately mugged or something. And I ask, "What's going on?" "There's people after me. There's one there, hiding in the bushes. And another one there, on that side of the road, up in the tree." There's obviously no one in either of the bushes or the tree. Oh shit, I think to myself. I've picked up a person in the middle of a psychotic break with gang-stalking delusions. "Okay, mate. Well, let's get you to the police station and get you sorted," I say, trying to sound reassuring and calming. And he seems responsive and says, "Thank you so much." Police station's just out on the main road. Only take us a minute to get there. I've never wanted a cop car to appear in my rearview mirror so much in all my life. Only 2 kilometers to go. We drive in silence for a minute, when he suddenly turns his head on the side, looks at me, and says in this super deep growl, "You're not taking me to a police station, are you?" "Yeah, mate," I say. "Sure I am. We're almost there, just hang on." "You're one of them. This was the fucking plan, wasn't it? I'm getting chased, and you just happen to show up at that second? Where are you taking me? Let me out. Let me out." And he starts thrashing around in my back seat, pounding the cushions with his fists and flailing wildly. Just then, we come around a curve, and there's the police station. "No, mate, look, there's the police station. We're turning in right now." And we did. And he calmed down, said thank you, and ran inside as soon as I parked. I gave him a few minutes to tell his story to the cops, then went inside and told the desk sergeant what happened, just for context. Literally happened 10 minutes ago. So, when I was a kid, my family was really close to the across-the-street neighbors. I was outside playing with a daughter when my parents told us they were going to run to the store for a bit. We asked them if we could stay at my house. I had a cool Barbie dream house, as her parents were home right across the street. My parents said yes and made sure to tell hers to keep an eye out. Once we're inside, we're thrilled to have the house to ourselves. Just like big kids, we make ourselves some lunch and watch cartoons for a bit. There's a sudden knock at the door and the fun begins. Because of the urgency on the knock, I hopped up and ran for the door, thinking it was my parents who forgot something. After looking through the side window, I saw what looked like my friend's brother. I flung the door open, and there was a man who was not my friend's dorky 6-foot-tall brother. The man looked jumpy, and told me he needed me to come outside because he had just hit my parents' car. I immediately panicked and asked which one. He took a few steps back to look at the driveway and said, "The red one. My mom's prized BMW." Now, don't judge me too harshly. I was maybe 9 or 10 and someone had told me they ruined the car my mom loved just as much, if not more, as us kids. I blurted out that my parents weren't home, and he told me he still needed me to come out to see the damages. Because obviously, a 9-year-old can assess the damages to a 1990s convertible BMW. I looked back at my friend, and while we chatted, he reached out to open the screen door. It was locked, but it was one of those shitty plastic ones that could have easily just been yanked a little hard and pulled open. He started to protest, but I slammed the door shut and immediately called my friend's mom. Thankfully, she's a pretty intimidating lady, and she marched right over before we could even finish explaining what was happening. The man was obviously startled by someone getting there so quickly. When she demanded to know why he was at my door, he stammered something about selling magazines. Obviously, he didn't have anything with him, so she told him to get lost or she was calling the cops. It was at this point I looked out and noticed a car pull up, and he quickly went to hop in. I think we all came to the realization at the same time that someone had been in a car waiting for him at the top of my street. My friend's mom turned ghost white with recognition, then immediately red with anger. Let's just say, we weren't allowed to be home alone for a long time after that. Hello everyone, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed listening to those creepy stories, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe. And hit the notification bell to know when I upload a new video. I just wanted to finish off by saying thank you to everyone who's been watching the videos. It really means a lot that you guys have been watching these. And with that, I'll see you guys in the next video.